Well, hello all. I've got straight up 6 o'clock, so I think it's time to get started. My name is Steve Brown. I'm a professor of agriculture and natural resources at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, but my office and where most of my work is done is at the Matanuska Experiment Farm in Palmer, Alaska. So with all this uh, COVID virus stuff going on, we thought it would be interesting now that everybody's doing Zoom to do a month-long series on great mountains of the world. And I think we're going to start with one of the greatest, Denali. I climbed it in 2009 and in 2010, and this is going to focus on the 2010 expedition. So to get ready for that, I'm going to put on my helmet, okay, and get my ice axe out, and we'll get started here. Okay, any climb of Denali, for the most part, starts in Talkeetna, where the climbing headquarters is. What'll happen is you show up there at the climbing headquarters, and you go through a briefing with the rangers because they want to make sure that you're prepared and you have the skills to go up the mountain. It's interesting, if they think you're not experienced enough or have the right equipment, they'll try to stop you, but they can't force you to stop. If you want to go up the mountain, you still can, which is unusual because most of the other great mountains in the world, for example, Aconcagua and Kilimanjaro, they require that you have a guide and that you meet certain health conditions and things like that. So we were briefed. It was interesting. We were flying onto the mountain April 27th. So we were the first team, or we were going to be the first team on the mountain that year. And so they gave us an extra briefing and showed us on a map where they wanted us to go because they knew the trail that we created up the mountain would be followed by every other climbing team that year. And they wanted to make sure that areas that we could get through in April over snow bridges, people might not be able to get through later in May and June and July. So here's our team. And the reason I picked the 2010 expedition was because in 2009, we had landed at base camp on the Hiltner Glacier. And this tall guy here to my right, okay, Joey Mcbrier, was one of my former Cub Scouts from Texas. And I had taught him to rock climb. And he came up and he hugged me and I had no idea who he was. And then I figured out that he's now a mountain guide with his wife, Melis, in Talkeetna. So we decided that we would come back a year later and climb together as a team. So here we are, April 27th. We're at the airport in Talkeetna. We're loading everything up onto a de Havilland Beaver ski plane. Like I said, probably 95% of all climbers at Denali start from Talkeetna. Here's basically an overview of our route up the mountain. Down here, it's just off the map. Base camp is at about 7,000 feet. And we were going to make multiple camps up the mountain. And the way it works is we take half of our equipment to one camp, climb back down, spend the night at the previous camp, then take the other half of our stuff up to the camp. And basically you're climbing the mountain twice by ferrying equipment up this way. The climb is really based into the lower mountain, which is below the Great Basin here at 14,000 feet, and the upper mountain above the 14,000 feet. So we'll start out, well, here we are flying along. It's really unnerving to be in the ski plane and you hear the proximity warnings go off because we're flying below 500, well, less than 500 feet above the terrain, and it's going, pull up, pull up. And it's neat, we had to come in because we were the first group on the plane. We came in and we didn't actually land. We just drugged the skis in the snow so that we could make a firm packed runway. So we went around again, came back down and landed at base camp. And here we are. This is a scene that you never really get to see most of the climbing season in camp. Usually at any given time, there's 100 to 200 climbers preparing to head up the mountain. You can see here, we're making the original tracks in the snow. And because I'm the old man on the trip, the others are setting up camp. That newspaper you see there that I'm reading is the student newspaper of the University of Texas, San Antonio. And I have started a tradition. I take a copy of that paper with me all over the world when I go mountaineering. And we like to say it has the largest circulation of, or the highest circulation of any student newspaper in the country. So in addition to the tents that we put up to sleep in, we also set up a cook tent. And if you look here, Mellis is standing in a pit we dug. In the middle of that, we've formed a snow table, okay, and put the tent over it. And then we've created benches along the walls that you can sit on. And this kind of becomes the living room of every camp, okay? We go in there, we cook in there. In fact, because we cook in there, it can get so warm that we'll strip down to our thermal underwear and sometimes keep the flaps open to keep it cool enough to be in there. This is our cooking arrangement. When you're up on Denali, everything you do is on ice or snow. And so to preserve our tables inside the cook tent, we take a board with, a board to insulate the stoves from melting. And we take 3 stoves with us. At any given time, we have 2 stoves going, one to melt water and one to cook, and then a backup in case something happens with one. So we had a rude awakening on our first night. It dropped to 40 below zero. That's pretty cold, especially when you're not used to it. And that was going to be a taste of every night to come. While we decided we'd spend 2 days in base camp, just sort of getting our legs and practicing our crevasse rescue technique. It's really important that crevasse rescue just become a second nature thing to you. How to set up Z-pulley systems and things like that. Because if you go through a crevasse, you don't have time to think about, okay, how do I set up this rescue? Well, anyway, just about 7 miles away is Mount Foraker, and we got to witness a gargantuan avalanche. And you can see there on the screen the equivalent height of the Empire State Building compared to Mount Foraker. Interestingly enough, anywhere from 1,000 to about 1,500 people a year successfully climb Denali, yet only about 5 to 10 people a year ever attempt Foraker. And the success rate is very low. I don't know exactly what the success rate is on Foraker, but I want to say it's on the order of 20 to 25%, whereas the success rate on Denali is about 50%. So this is what I call the ubiquitous CMC, the clean mountain can. All of the solid human waste has got to come down the mountain with you, which means you get to carry it around. And this is the can that you get to, this is the can you use to deposit it. And fortunately, those plastic bags freeze, but the rangers know approximately how much human waste should come down that mountain. So don't be tempted to leave it up there. So after 2 days in base camp, we decide to get underway. We're completely roped up at this point. Because we don't know where the crevasses are. Sure, you can see a lot of crevasses, but it's not the ones you can see that get you. It's the ones that you can't see. So we're carrying about 60 pounds on our backs, and we're pulling about 100 pounds in our sleds. So we're really weighted down, and even though we're low on the mountain right now, on the Hiltner Glacier, we're fully rigged up for a crevasse rescue if necessary. And you can see my sling there with all the rescue equipment that I shortly will get to use. My nickname on this particular expedition was Crevasse Bait. because I fell through 3 different crevasses. It always seemed to be when I was on lead. So this particular one, Joey rappelled down into the crevasse and took a picture of me waiting for everybody else to pull me up, which they eventually did. So what we would do is we would carry little flags to mark crevasses when we found them. This was not so much for our benefit, but for the benefit of other climbers as they were coming up the mountain. And finally, we're looking down the Hiltner Glacier Valley. Pictures do not do it any justice. The grandeur is just unimaginable. And I tell you, you may be watching this presentation having gone and done Denali or thinking about doing Denali, or maybe, mountaineering's not for you. It's worth the money to spend to do a glacier landing at base camp to see the Hiltner Glacier and to walk around on it. So even though we're carrying very, very strong tents, Denali can experience very high winds in excess of 100 miles an hour. So what we have to do is we set up our tents and then we build snow block walls around the tent. And that consumes a great deal of time and a lot of energy. And you can see here, we'll cut the blocks and then we'll load them onto our sleds and carry them to camp. And we put walls around everything. Behind this particular wall is that CMC can, okay, that we use for a bathroom. So, when you've got to get up in the middle of the night and the wind is blowing 50, 60 miles an hour and you've got to sit on that can, you're certainly thankful for those walls for protection. And this is our 11,000 foot camp. This is one of the more dangerous camps on Denali because there's significant danger of overhanging ice falls. So we get in there, and we're always looking up to make sure something's not coming at us. Now, an interesting thing, when we get to camp, okay, we don't unrope. We stay belayed together. And what we do is we probe the entire camp for crevasses. And what we do is we take those little wands with the little flags on them and we create a perimeter. And as long as we're inside that probe perimeter, we can be unroped. But we can't take one step outside of the flag perimeter unless we're roped up because we don't know where the crevasses are. There have been several deaths where people literally stepped 1 foot beyond the perimeter and fell into a crevasse. Those of you all that know me, I'm a professor of agriculture, and so I thought it'd be fun to bring some flowers and create a raised bed there at 11,000 feet. So beyond the 11,000 foot camp, this is where the real climbing begins. We're at the top of a hill called Motorcycle Hill, okay? It's the first steep climb that we got to do. Beyond Motorcycle Hill, what you're looking up there about middle of the screen and to the right is Squirrel Hill. It was named Squirrel Hill a number of years back when a squirrel somehow ended up there. It must have been in someone's pack. And the Park Service spent a great deal of effort trying to catch and rescue that squirrel, but they never did catch it. We were standing here, it's now the beginning of May. 2 weeks from now, a French climber would slide to his death in this location because his sled that he was pulling began to slide off the hill and he dived for it and the sled pulled him off the cliff in about a 2,000 to 3,000 fall down to the next glacier. One of the tricky parts of the mountain is Windy Corner. In 2009, when we came around Windy Corner, it was calm, it was beautiful. We got our cache in at 13,500 feet. We're coming back down to the 11,000 foot camp and I see my climbing partner on the front of the rope suddenly go down, throw herself down, and dig her ice axe and her crampons in. And then I got hit with a blast of wind. And now I'm down flat with my crampons in the snow and Glacier hanging on. And what had taken us 15 minutes to climb going up without the wind took us 2 hours to get around Windy Corner, basically putting in ice screws along the way because we estimate the winds were probably 70 to 80 miles an hour. Oh, interestingly enough, the ravens on Denali are very smart, and they've learned how to dig up people's food caches. So when we cache food, we have to bury it at least 10 feet down so that the ravens don't dig it up. So now we've reached what's called the Basin. It's the 14,000 foot camp. Really, it's kind of like the second base camp on Denali. This is the end of the lower mountain, and usually climbers spend a day or two here resting because the next thing that they're going to tackle coming out of this particular camp is the 2,000 foot head wall. And what groups will do here is they will practice fixed line ascents at the 14,000 foot camp so that when it comes time to go up the fixed lines, up the head wall, they can do it without having to think about it. One of the neat things about the 14,000 foot camp is there's a sit down crapper, which is like the greatest luxury you could possibly imagine. What happens as the climbing season progresses, everybody will set up camps around this sit down crapper. And lines will form during the day. During certain parts of the day, it'll be a line of guys waiting to use the bathroom. And then it'll be lines of women. And I'm going to try to pause everybody right quick because someone. There we go. You can unmute yourself at the end when we have a question, or if you have questions, but right now I just muted everybody. So anyway, like I said, these lines form, you know, for an hour or two, it'll be guys, for an hour or two, it'll be women, and it goes back and forth. And there's really no such thing as privacy when you're doing this. And it's kind of a bizarre feeling because everybody is watching you because they want you to hurry up and get off this thing. Well, in 2009, when I was on the mountain, a colleague of mine from UAF saw me sitting here, and she decided to come over and strike up a conversation. And her name was Heidi, and I'm like, you know, Heidi, can we not do this? So anyway, this is believe it or not, the $1 million view is not Mount Foraker in the distance, but the opportunity to not have to sit on a really narrow can. So. One of our strategies for climbing the mountain was to have the best food possible. We tried to stay away from freeze-dried food as much as we could. So breakfast was, you know, the big meal of the day. In this particular case, our favorite breakfast consisted of, you know, 2 pounds of hash browns, about a ½ pound of bacon, butter, and Pop-Tarts, okay? And we ate that as often as we could because it doesn't sound very good down here, but up there it was wonderful. Still, eating like that, I lost about 2 pounds a day on the trip. Okay, in our tent, one of the problems that we have, you could take a synthetic insulated sleeping bag on the trip with you, but it's bulkier and potentially slightly heavier than down. The problem with down though is it soaks up water, and in your tent at night, the condensation from your breath collects on the sides of the tent, and it slowly rains down on you as the wind blows the tent around. And what happens is each night that condensation soaks into the bag And each night your sleeping bag gets slightly less warmer than the night before because there's no way to dry the condensation out of your bag. This is my buddy John. We tented together. He's writing in his diary. There's actually very, very little free time when we're not climbing because we're either repairing equipment, we're setting up equipment, we're taking equipment down, we're collecting snow to melt for water, we're cooking dinner, we're cooking meals, fueling stoves. So there's always something to do. There's very, very little downtime. So we spent 2 days at the 14,000 foot Basin camp, practicing ascending the fixed lines. When the climbing season really gets on, this is the big bottleneck on the mountain because there's one fixed line up the mountain and one fixed line down the mountain. And if you get a team, at any given time, there's several teams, ascending or descending. And if someone gets fouled up, everybody else is hanging there in the cold, waiting for that knot to get fixed or a piece of equipment to become unjammed. So that's why you spend time at 14,000 feet practicing ascension of this and doing it while roped up and being belayed. So if you look, the climb is going to go up and into these rocks up here. So I don't have any pictures of actually ascending the fixed lines because there's just no time to take that picture. Here I am at the top of the fixed line and I'm belaying John the last few feet up. What we're going to do here is we're going to put in a cache at 16,000 feet, okay? Then we go back down the fixed lines to the 14,000 foot camp. And then the next day, we do it all over again. We take the rest of our equipment, go up the head wall, and on the second trip, we're there to stay. So now we're on top of the West Buttress. The West Buttress is about a mile long. Well, here's John coming up the head wall. Even though it's below zero, we are just soaked in sweat. Because one of the things we do is we try to stay as zipped up as much as possible in case there's a fall or something like that, and we have to spend time being rescued. So once you get up on top of the West Buttress, the first obstacle is an ascent called Washburn's Thumb. Again, we're belaying up this. And if you've never been on a 3-person rope team, the guy who has it the worst is the guy in the middle. Because either the leader is pulling you or the guy in the back is pulling you back. And there's just no making either one completely happy. So we get up on top of Washburn's Thumb. It's so beautiful up there. The sky is so dark, it's almost black. This is what all of the West Buttress is pretty much like. It's very narrow and it's long falls on each side. This is one of the areas where deaths occur on Denali. For the most part, you're going to summit Denali if the weather lets you. Most of the reasons climbing teams fail on Denali is because the weather doesn't let them do it. Okay, Denali's technical, but the two things about Denali that make unsuccessful climbs is wind. Okay, and really on top of the West Buttress, there's not time to really put in anchors. So we have a running belay where the deal is if one team member falls off the West Buttress to the right, the other team member jumps off the West Buttress to the left, and hopefully you counterbalance each other. So we finally reach high camp. Okay, if you look in the middle of this picture, you can just barely see some little dots. These are some other climbing teams that have come up the mountain behind us. Okay, we basically, you have about a 3-day window of opportunity once you reach high camp. After 3 days, most people are just so exhausted from being at 19,000 feet that they just don't have the energy to go on to the summit. So our plan was to spend a day there, rest up, get some energy, and hopefully we would have good weather. We called the weather service into Talkeetna, and they told us that we had about a 12-hour shot, so we decided to forego the rest. We slept that night, and we stayed in our sleeping bags and our tents until the sun hit us, and then we started climbing. And right out of high camp is the most treacherous part of Denali. This is the climb leading up to Denali Pass. This is where most deaths on Denali have occurred. And they don't occur going up the mountain, they occur coming down the mountain, because mentally, once you've reached the summit, you think you're done. And the truth is, you're only halfway done. You still have to get all the way down the mountain. And so people let their guard down. Also, too, there's fixed lines here that the Park Service has set up. And sometimes they can get covered in snow. People can't find them, so they choose not to use them. They get off course, fall through a crevasse. So we've reached the top of Denali Pass. That's a really great feeling, because now you're beginning to get the sense, I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna make it. I did want to point out all of the guys on this trip, we were all Eagle Scouts, and Joey's wife, Melis, she was also a High Adventure Explorer Scout. So all of us had a background with the Boy Scouts. So it's a long slug from the top of Denali Pass across the top of the mountain. Here we're crossing what's called the football field, and we're about to gain the summit ridge. We're on the summit ridge now, and this is where you really get the sense, I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna make it. And here's the summit. Okay, if you look over here to the left of the picture, there's the summit marker that we've just cleared off. It's 60 below zero. We had carried a bunch of posters from elementary schools from around the country that we were going to pose with and send back to those schools. Literally, we were on the summit for a minute. It was so cold that I wasn't even going to pull down my face mask. So to be able to prove that that was me. But you can see in my goggles, you can see Melis taking my picture. And I said, well, what about the kids' posters? And I can't repeat the expletive that everybody commented with, but it was like, we're not going to do the posters up here. And there's the actual summit marker. You can buy a replica of these in the gift shop in Denali. And I bought one, and I put it on my desk, and I tell people that I stole this off the mountain, which of course was not true, but. And here we are, we've gone to the summit. It's been an extremely long day. We've successfully made it down Denali Pass. It's now nighttime, and we're just so excited to have summited. It was so cold that we crawled into our sleeping bags without taking our coats and stuff off. Because now all we wanted to do is get up the next morning and get down the mountain. So when we got back to the 14,000 foot camp, it's quite a bit warmer, and we broke out some of the posters. Here's just a few. The one there on the left is from Hiawatha Elementary School in Hiawatha, Kansas. The one on the right is from Vista Academy in Moore, Oklahoma, and we had these from all over the country. One of the things I did too is I carried a GPS beacon with me that every 10 minutes gave off our coordinates, and I created a 3D model of the mountain so that kids at these schools could follow what we were doing. And interestingly enough, right when I came off the summit, it was my turn to lead, and I blew an anchor and fell, and Joey caught me on belay. Well, my wife was watching the GPS map and noticed the sudden ascent and was a little bit worried until the next 10 minutes when she saw that dot moving again. Well, we get to, this is now, let me back up. It's day 13, and we're getting, it took us 2 days to fully descend the mountain, and we are pulling as hard as we can to get to base camp. But the pilot, we're in radio contact with the pilot, and the pilot's telling us, you know, it's socking in Talkeetna. If you're not here in an hour, I'm gone. And we are pulling as hard as we can. The last hill you have to climb, you're coming down the mountain, but there's a hill called Heartache Hill as you go up into base camp. And to hear that airplane fly over our heads because the weather was getting too bad just breaks your heart, because what you're dreaming of is a hamburger at the West Rib Cafe and Pub in Talkeetna. Well, we had to spend the night, and they came and got us the next day, but it was dreaming of that hamburger all night long is just the toughest torture you can imagine. Well, anyway, this is Mr. Stubbs, the deceased mayor of Talkeetna. It's kind of a tradition that if you successfully climb the mountain, you get to hold Mr. Stubbs. And so I did, and I'm very proud of this picture. And if you look at my face, you can see I'm really, really sunburned. And we slathered sunscreen on us. Every time we stood still, we were putting on sunscreen. So that was the climb. This presentation wouldn't be complete without me acknowledging the contributions that my scoutmaster, Mr. David Hutchinson, gave to me. When I was 11 years old, my first camping trip with him in my Boy Scout troop was to the Quartz Mountains in Oklahoma. Here in Alaska, we would consider those just hills. But growing up on the flat plains, I was enthralled. And from the time I was 11 years old, I was hooked. And so one of the things that I do whenever I go do a big mountain is I make a picture book for Mr. Hutchinson and dedicate the expedition to him. Mr. Hutchinson recently passed away. I did get to see him in December and thank him once again because 95% of the skill set I needed to successfully complete Denali, I learned as a Boy Scout. You know, you can learn knots and equipment techniques and things like that, but the big thing that makes it or breaks it on Denali is, do you know when to be a leader? Do you know when to be a follower? Can you anticipate what your crewmates' needs are going to be? Those are the most important skills that you need to do Denali. So thank you, Mr. Hutchinson. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions or you want to email me or something like that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing this. And I'm going to, hold on just a minute, stop recording it. This will be available. Oops, there it is.